Section 1 of the BMAT is known as probably one of the most similar sections in the BMAT to the UCAT. And that's for good reason. It pretty much tests a lot of the same things that UCAT tests. And for that reason, it can be seen as slightly undervalued by people. And they might not revise a lot for it because they think their UCAT knowledge can just transfer right onto it. Now, this is not true at all. And for you guys, if you've got the BMAT coming up soon, it might be valuable for us to go through a few tips and tricks that you might want to apply to the BMAT. And specifically Section 1 today. So if it sounds like a good idea to you, let's get straight into the video. Alright, so the BMAT Section 1 is composed of 32 questions in about an hour. So that leaves you with just around 2 minutes for every question, which sounds like a lot of time, but Section 1 of the BMAT is actually quite chunky in the sense that it has a lot of content to break down, and it's not sort of one-line question and answers. Very rarely will you get that. So the basis of it is that you have to understand there are two main question types. You've got problem solving and critical thinking. Now the critical thinking questions typically take a lot more time because they are essentially verbal reasoning questions. They give you sort of a passage of text or a few sentences or an argument, and they ask you to analyze that argument. Whereas problem solving is more sort of non-verbal reasoning. It'll give you a sequence of numbers maybe, and they'll ask you to read into that. And so that's more numerical, think about it, and critical thinking is more verbal. So you need to understand that there are two types, and you need to tackle them equally. So for example, in critical thinking, you should be focusing more on understanding how to read pieces of text. Now, whether you do this by reading newspapers or books or picking up guides on critical thinking, of which there are a lot of fantastic books out there on Amazon that you could go and read, make sure you understand how to read a passage in sight to understanding the argument that the author's coming across with, understanding the opposing arguments, kind of realizing what the tones are throughout the passage, and also sort of understanding what you have to get out of that passage. So what the main message the author is sending. Those are the key sort of fundamentals to critical thinking. Whereas in problem solving, it's really good for you to get in the habit of doing loads of puzzles. So this is where the UCAT might come in handy, and decision making and quantitative reasoning are particularly similar, abstract reasoning less so. And you also might want to read about things like problem solving books, IQ tests. These are all fantastic places that you can do preparation around problem solving. So it's about tackling the section by breaking it down into its core segments and then revising each one specifically. And that also helps you because when you're doing the exam, you should be able to understand whether the question is problem solving or critical thinking, and that'll just keep you more calm during the exam because you'll know exactly what you need to be doing. Now the next tip is more sort of important for your critical thinking questions, but it is to read the passage carefully, and it's to structure your reading carefully, more importantly. So when I say structure reading, all I mean is when you're reading a big passage of text or, an argument of some sort, it's important to first read the stem of the question. So understand what the question is looking for. Is it looking for an argument, looking for a conclusion, looking for a message? What exactly is it looking for? And then you want to go in and read the passage. Just because once you've read the question, you're reading the passage in a different lens. And that lens is going to help you zone in on the parts that you actually need to read. So there are going to be bits and pieces in the passage that you may not well need to read, that you may not well need to understand, but there are going to be bits that you really need to understand, are far more critical to the question that you're doing. So make sure you're reading the passage carefully, however long it is, whether it's 1 line or 5 lines or 7 lines, make sure you're reading it, and having read the question first, you should know what to look for. On a similar vein, look for key words, things like in conclusion or despite, or therefore. These kind of connective words are really important because they can point you in the direction of the bits of the passage that are most important for you to read. So if you're looking for a conclusion, obviously in conclusion or therefore are going to be really important for you. But if you're looking for an argument against, however, despite, regardless, these kind of connective words are going to be really important in highlighting the parts of the passage that might argue against what the author is trying to say. So really important to have a list of keywords that you're looking out for. And that's why you have to read the question before, because now you know what part of the passage you're looking for, and therefore which keyword you're looking for. Also, don't be thrown off by large amounts of information. Now, I hear that BMAT is cutting down on the bigger passage of text questions, so that's good, because we used to have 2 pages of text for one question, which is way too crazy. But still, they might throw in a few questions which are slightly big in terms of the amount of text they include. Don't worry, don't panic, go through the passage like we said, reading the question first and take it bit by bit. Sometimes you don't even need to read half of the passage to get the answer. So don't be thrown off by any large passages of text, and remember to always look for what the question is asking. Now if you're trying to save time and you've read your passage and you're still running out of time to answer the question, use a process of elimination. Now sometimes you just have to give a good educated guess. This is where eliminating wrong answers is really helpful. Sometimes there are going to be answers among the 5 options that are just quite clearly wrong. You know, you've read the passage and this answer just is obviously not right. So let's say the author is arguing that private schools aren't as good as public schools for various reasons, and that's quite an obvious message the author is giving across. If one of the options is that private schools are a far better option to public schools, that's obviously wrong because that's going directly against what the author's guessing. So don't put that answer down as your option and immediately eliminate it. This is why it's so good to eliminate your wrong answers early on so that you can focus on the 2 or 3 answers that you might be thinking about putting down. So always eliminate the wrong answers first, and that saves you just a bunch of time when you're obviously up against the clock. Got about 5 minutes left to answer to like 9 questions. It just helps you to eliminate wrong answers immediately and clarifies your thinking a bit more, and I find that it really helped me. And that's really all the tips that there are. The final big thing is to develop your game plan. Now you can pick any of the tips that I've said. You can develop your own tips, bits of advice, your little hacks to the exam, but just make sure that you've developed an overall game plan to how you're going to tackle this section. It's a really varied section. You know, section 2 is far more science-based, you know what you're doing. Section 3 is an essay, it's pretty simple. Section 1 is really the one where it's so vague, you really don't know what's going to come up, and you just need to have a game plan. Make sure you test the game plan in some past papers, you know, do a few of the mocks or do a few papers that have come up in the last few years if you find them available to you, and do that game plan. Make sure you're really sort of rehearsed, that you understand exactly how you're going to tackle the section, because that's the best way of doing it. And if you've got a game plan, no matter how stuck you are, how time pressured you are, how panicked you are, if you implement that game plan in the exam, you'll be absolutely fine. That's the last thing I'm going to say on this. Hopefully it's been a useful video and you understand a little bit more about BMAT and Section 1. If you've got any more questions or queries or concerns, let me know in the comments down below. Contact me on Instagram. But apart from that, I will see you all in the next video. See you in a bit.